Distinguished friends, colleagues, protocols being observed. I bring literally and spiritually warm greetings from the Caribbean to all our esteemed friends, relatives of Mother Africa, and children of the diaspora. The theme of this festival, which has brought us together for actionable contemplation, is about rebuilding the transatlantic trade ties for the socio-economic and cultural advancement of the people of Africa and the Americas. And I am honored to have been asked to share the OECS perspective from one side of the transatlantic triangle. The recognition and importance of the transatlantic solidarity between Africa and the Americas has a long, painful but proud history. Every great Pan-African leader, whether of Caribbean, American or African lineage, has at some seminal moment asserted the strategic necessity for the restoration of ties that bind us if the far-flung children of Africa are to truly inhabit a room of our own in the mansion of humanity. We can recall the words of Nkrumah that, and I quote, "I'm not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me," emphasizing the intrinsic relationship with the transplanted children of Africa. We are also inspired and guided by the words of Lumumba that, and I quote, "African unity and solidarity are no longer dreams. They must be expressed in decisions," end of quote. And the Caribbean's very own Walter Rodney, who taught at the University of Dar es Salaam, reminded us of the importance of an understanding of African history as a tool for the emancipation of peoples of African descent when he said, quote, "An overall view of ancient African civilization and ancient African cultures is required to expunge the myths about the African past, which linger in the mind of black people everywhere. This is the main revolutionary function of African history," end of quote. With a population of 1.5 billion people, Africa is the second most populous continent in the world. Today, 60% of Africa's population is under the age of 25. By 2030, young Africans are expected to make up 42% of the global youth population. These statistics point to the incredible potential of the continent if the unbounded capacity of youth for innovation is nurtured. People are the greatest wealth any country can have, but Africa is also immensely rich in natural wealth. Oil constitutes 43.5% of the natural wealth in resource-rich sub-Saharan Africa. Land accounts for about 35%, and metals and minerals are also substantial contributors. For instance, metals and minerals account for 27% of Zambia's wealth, 26% of South Africa's, and 14% of Botswana's natural wealth. Moreover, sub-Saharan Africa houses nearly half of the world's uncultivated land that can be brought into production and uses only 2% of its renewable water resources compared to a global average of 5%. This is the socio-economic context from which we can explore how rebuilding transatlantic trade ties between Africa and the Americas can lead to socio-economic and cultural advancement for both regions. History tells us that transatlantic trade has been a global game changer and can be the same in a different way in the future. The transatlantic trade, as we know, which began in the 15th century, constituted the largest and longest trafficking of more than 12 million enslaved people over a 400-year period. And the impact of this exploitation and genocide of African people is well documented from Eric Williams' Capitalism and Slavery, to Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, to more recent work by Hilary Beckles. It can be argued that if the transatlantic slave trade could have propelled the Industrial Revolution in the West, a transatlantic trade based on free and fair trade, on equitable terms, can propel a global prosperity revolution through capital accumulation, conversion of raw materials into value-added export, and the expansion of global trade systems. The evolution of trade relations from the colonial era to the present has been shaped by several key historical markers. The colonial era, 15th to mid-20th century, when European powers established colonies primarily in Africa, Asia, and the Americas, exploiting these regions for raw material and labor. The colonial economies were structured to benefit the colonizing countries at the expense of the colonized societies. The post-colonial era, mid-20th century onwards, with the end of colonial rule, several nations sought to establish their own economic systems and trade policies. This led to a shift from colonial trade patterns to a more diverse and independent economic relations. Although neo-colonial relationships sought to maintain the cultural and economic hegemony of the past. Then there's a period of globalization, late 20th century to the present. The rise of globalization significantly altered trade relations. Advances in technology and communication, along with the reduction of trade barriers, led to an increasingly interconnected global economy. In recent decades, the emergence of economies like China, India, Brazil, and South Africa, the BRICS, further transformed global trade dynamics, shifting the balance of economic power and creating new trade networks. These phases highlight the transformation from exploitative colonial trade systems to a more complex globalized economic interactions. The current state of global trade ties is characterized by complex interconnections and evolving relationships. Major trade agreements like the US, Mexico, Canada, and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership in Asia signify a shift towards regional trading blocs. Economic partnerships, particularly between developed and emerging economies, are focusing on technology transfer, sustainable development, and infrastructure investment. Cultural exchanges, facilitated by digital platforms and international education programs, continue to enhance mutual understanding and are mushrooming into a profitable global creative economy. These developments reflect a global trade environment that is dynamic, influenced by geopolitical shifts, and increasingly focused on digital economies and sustainability. We come now to challenges in rebuilding these trade ties. Rebuilding trade ties between Africa and the Americas faces several challenges, but distance is not a challenge. It is a myth designed to obscure the hegemony of Western airlines on air connectivity, for example, between developing countries. Let us look at this. The direct distance between Dakar, Senegal, and the nearest point in the Caribbean, St. John's, Antigua, is 4,746 kilometers. This is the shortest over-water distance between the African continent and the Caribbean region. In contrast, the shortest route from Africa to the Caribbean via Europe, Brussels in Belgium, is 12,321 kilometers, 3 times the geographically direct route. Geopolitical instability is often cited as a reason for trade avoidance, but it is simply that we have not tried hard enough, and we uncritically subscribe to the narrative of instability, hunger, and poverty that is the stereotype of Africa. Nothing has incapacitated international trade more than the conflicts and the instability instigated by the global powers in Europe, the Middle East, and the COVID-19 pandemic. disparities in the enabling infrastructure for trade, especially related to the 4 lanes of trade, air, land, sea, and digital connectivity, are aggravated by visa and discriminatory immigration restrictions. Establishing that connectivity between Africa and the Americas, together with streamlined, transparent trade and fair policies and agreements, will enable and accelerate trade. If we build it, they will come. We turn to opportunities for socio-economic and cultural advancement. The opportunities for economic growth, such as emerging markets, technological innovations, and sustainable development projects through doing business with Africa, are immense. Equally, given the cultural affinities, the growth opportunities in the orange economy are largely untouched. What then are the conducive conditions for socio-economic and cultural advancement between Africa and the Americas? Fixing 3 of the 4 lanes of connectivity, air, sea, and digital, is the first prerequisite for opening opportunities for this advancement. It is the connection between people that ultimately fuels the interchange between civilizations. The capacity to meet and mix cultural interchanges and exchanges through art, music, literature, the hosting of festivals that celebrate cultural affinities and ancestral congruity, are essential in reconnecting Africa to the Caribbean and the Americas. A vital component of this is educational exchanges that not only promote the sharing of knowledge, but also facilitate joint research across all knowledge domains. In conclusion, 2023 has been a historic year of return and reconciliation for peoples of African descent. The recognition by the African Union of the African diaspora as the 6th region of Africa, and the outreach by the Afrexim Bank to the Caribbean and the Americas have been decisive steps in opening new doors of opportunity. The transatlantic trade, in its extractive and exploitative precursor, generated the wealth that propelled the Industrial Revolution in the West. Today, a vibrant transatlantic trade that is inclusive, dynamic, and fair can create new vistas for the transplanted children of Africa and bring justice to a world poisoned to its core with the venom of racial and ethnic prejudice. I close with the aspirational vision of the great Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who confidently predicted that, and I quote, "All of us may not live to see the higher accomplishment of an African empire, so strong and powerful as to compel the respect of mankind. But we in our lifetime can so work and act as to make that dream a possibility within another generation."